Welcome to another podcast of Pratha, the youth community that is officially appreciated by Government of India for its community level service. And this podcast is in collaboration with Geo and Nakshatra IS Academy. Here we explore the stories and voices that shape our world. Today, we are honored to have a very special guest with us. He is an official spokesperson and additional secretary international relations for the Tibetan Government in Exile, and a tireless advocate for the rights and freedom of Tibetan people. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Tenzing Lekshe. Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity once again.
Sir, it's an immense pleasure to have you with us once again. And your unwavering dedication and tireless efforts have not only championed the Tibetan cause, but have also inspired the countless individuals worldwide.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And since we have a leader like His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, who not just talks about Tibet, but about the entire humanity. So we are privileged to work under him, not just for the cause of Tibet, but also for the entire humanity. Thank you.
Right. So we are very excited to begin this session, and I rightly said that we are very, very privileged to have you once again with us to discuss over global geopolitics and the current events that's going across the world. But before that, I would like to understand from you, what is the current status of Tibetan government in exile and the Tibetan independence movement?
See, the Central Tibet administration, as for all the Tibetans elsewhere, believe that this is the legitimate government, right? So by the fact that every Tibetans elsewhere, every 5 years they vote for their political leader, right? And we have, over the last 2 decades, we had leaderships who are directly elected by the people in different parts of the world, right? So this itself shows that all the Tibetans recognize this as their own government, one thing. But unlike, because it was not being diplomatically recognized by any other states or any other countries, but you need to also understand that if it comes to the matter of Tibet, just 1 second, the voice also coming. So if it comes to the matter of Tibet and it concerns the Tibetan people, the United States government, or the Indian government, or any other governments, or any other politicians, parliamentarians, think tanks, medias are talking to us, right? So that means that this small hillock in the Himachal Pradesh became a center hub of the Tibetan movement, right? And not only this being a hub of the Tibetan movement, but we also have more than 12 officers of Tibet in different parts of the world, right, as emissaries for the Tibetan people. So we do have many people all over the world, right, Tibetans scattered all over the world. We do have supporters and networks all over the world, championing for the Tibetan movement, for the Tibetan cause, which is a just cause. So no matter whether they recognize it as a government or not, right, it is not a matter. The matter is that on Tibet issues, the Central Tibetan administration is the administration which talks about and be the voice of the voiceless Tibetans inside Tibet.
So, as you also mentioned that the Central Tibet administration lacks formal diplomatic recognition. And as of 2023, the Central Tibetan administration based in Dharamshala represents the interest of Tibetan diaspora, estimated at about 150,000 worldwide. What are CTA's main goal and strategies at this stage? And how does it seek advance the cause of Tibetan autonomy?
So if you go back to history, see, the Central Tibet administration is the continuation of the government of Tibet, right, after the Chinese occupied Tibet. After we came into exile, His Holiness, as our temporal and spiritual leader, came into exile, and this became a government in exile. for not just for the Tibetans elsewhere, but even the Tibetan people inside Tibet recognize these as the voice of the Tibetan people, right? This is one thing. So now when you talk about the history, so when, right? And it goes back to the fifth Dalai Lama's time, right? The Ganden Potang, right, government of Tibet, which was established in 1642, before the Manchu ruled China, right? So this is the government which continues from Ganden Potang government. So therefore there is this legitimacy, right? And it is not just about the well-being of the 150,000 Tibetans, but also the main mission is to restore freedom of Tibet, right? And in order to fulfill the aspirations of Tibetan people. This is one thing. And second thing, the second mission, in order to complement that, we have more than around 80,000 Tibetans who escaped in early 60s and 1959, around that time. So the instant rehabilitation is needed, right? There were chaos, there were problems, there were lots of issues, health issues, rehabilitation issues. So at that moment, at the initial stage, right, the rehabilitation is the most important thing. So therefore, we looked into the two missions. We still look into the two missions. As when you see the establishment over here in the Central Tibet Administration, many of the departments are focused on the rehabilitations, whereas some departments are working on the political issues. So this department, as I'm sitting over here, is working on the political mission, that is to restore freedom.
All right, sir. So before we move ahead, I would just like to make an announcement that in the final minutes of the podcast, we're joined by several students, several UPSC aspirants, and they're looking forward to this podcast as they're understanding about India-Tibet-US relationship and to understand the global geopolitics. So in the final minutes of the podcast, the Geo platform will automatically determine the top 3 attendees based on the engagement. The top 3 attendees will receive certificates from Pratha and Geo events, validating their exceptional participation in the podcast. The attendee with the highest engagement will also receive a special hamper from Pratha. So this was just a little information that I would like to give. And we have already started getting a lot of questions from the students that have joined, but we'll take the question at the end. And now just progressing with the session. So as you said that, very important that you have to protect and preserve the human rights and global communities coming forward. We could see earlier this month, US Congressional Delegation, including the former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, met the Dalai Lama in Dharamshala, the seat of Tibetan Government in Exile. This is seen as a way of US to put pressure on China regarding Tibet. But the question is, why now? It signals renewed US interest in Tibet issues and support for Dalai Lama for Tibetan autonomy.
See, US has a consistently supporting Tibet for over years, for over decades or so. So when you look back to 2000, in 2002, there was this Tibet Policy Act. Then in 2000, there was this Tibet Policy and Support Act. Then we have in 2018, this Reciprocal Act on Tibet. Then there's another, now the recent one is a result of Tibet Act. So consistently, there is this support in the US Congress. That means that it is not just one party, but it's a bicameral and the bipartisan support is very much there, which signifies that the United States people, right, supports Tibet at large. So therefore, the visit of the Congressional Delegation led by Congressman McCall and Nancy Pelosi and then Jim McGovern and others is very important for us, because with this act coming into law, right, which talks about Tibet as an independence, right, historically independent, and not just, it also challenged the China's disinformation and misinformation about Tibet, Tibet's history, Tibet's culture, its holiness, and all these things. Because, see, China has a huge propaganda mechanisms spread all over the world, right? And so far, we Tibetans are informing the world that what China has been telling us, not true, right?
Right.
Because this all through the time for the last 65 years, we've been calling the world that our cause is a just cause, based on truth, based on non-violence. So I think the support right now, which shows, it amplifies the voice of the Tibetans to make sure that China comes from the table to talk about the Tibetan aspirations, right? And also it stressed that Tibet is not resolved now. It is still unresolved. So it has to speak up.
Absolutely. And when you mention about the global community and with respect to US, it's not just the US. Australian delegates have also met Dalai Lama. And when we are talking about Australia, US, can we talk about the Quad and what will be the role of Quad alliance in addressing the Tibet issue and China's human rights record? Because
Sorry for interruption. So, Tenzin sir, can you just realign your camera so that you are at the middle of it?
Just 1 second. Am I good enough? Okay. Is it
Yeah,
good?
this is fine. Sure. Thank you. You
And
can go ahead, Divanshi.
yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Roshan. I think these all adjustments we have to make.
right.
Yeah.
So for the Quad, so on Tibet issues, now let me tell you about Tibet issues. Tibet issue is not about confrontations, but Tibet issue is not at all about confrontations. So we shouldn't look into the lens of a purely geopolitical nature, right? Where we talk about the competitions, right? So therefore, when you look at Tibet, right, it is we are part of this humanity. We are part of this global citizen. So what we've been asking for is not just for the sake of Tibetans, but for China, right? But even for China, even though China has been our counterpart for the last 65 years, we are creating a space for China to come together and talk about not just for the interest of the Tibetan people, but for the China's interest and also for the interest of the larger humanity. So therefore, Quad, yes, India is very much supporting Tibet issues. Indian government and publics till date has been supporting Tibet issues. When you look back to 1959, when His Holiness came into exile, His Holiness says that, but he has nobody except sky and the soil. But Indian government and public embraced the Tibetan people, His Holiness, and treated us as the guests, right? And since then, Jayaprakashji has convened an India convention in Calcutta. Then Jansat Sangh party also had resolutions even in 1959 on Tibet issues, right? In showing solidarity for Tibet issues. So since then, even now, India has been in the front supporting Tibet. And the United States is there, the like-minded countries, yes, the Europe and elsewhere, they are supporting because it is not just to confront China, right? But to resolve the Tibet issue so that the world will be a better place for all of us, right? It is not just for the Tibetan people. But see, if the Tibet issue remains, the conflict remains unresolved, right? The Tibetan people will not be the only one who suffers. Everybody suffers. Look at the environment, right? Even at this point, we are in a small hillock, right? We are sweating, right, with these humids, and there's a global the climate change going on. Unlike before, we have witnessed this sudden change. What about Tibet, where we have more than 46,000 glaciers restored or stored over there, being called as a third pole, and the glaciers are retreating, right? Glaciers are losing. Therefore, we are witnessing so many floods, landslides inside Tibet. And in 20, 30 years from now, imagine if we don't have glaciers, right? If we don't have a significant glaciers, what will be an issue. But it is not just the issue of Tibet. Whole Asian countries, South Asian countries, depending on the Tibetan rivers, will suffer. So therefore, it's a global phenomenon. It's a global issue. And Tibet issue cannot be looked as a standalone issue, right? So therefore, the time has reached for the world to come together, and largely the India, United States, Australia, Japan. So they should come forward, because this Quad is mainly for security purpose, but Tibet, not just for security, but for the entire humanity, for the survival of the entire humanity, the Tibet issue has to be spoken.
Absolutely, sir. And just taking your line only when you said that India, US, Japan, they should come together. And Tibet is not a standalone issue. It is an issue of humanity, and it should be dealt with utmost sensitivity and utmost strategic partnership. And you also mentioned about that India has been always very vocal and supportive in Tibetans movement. Recently, when even US delegation was here, India facilitated the meeting, which some experts see as a shift in New Delhi's position towards Beijing. How does this visit fit into broader US-India partnership, particularly in the context of Quad alliance against Chinese aggression?
See, when you look at Quad, right, most of the people who are on the stage talking about Quad will not mention China as their target, but somehow it relates to China. So therefore, even now, I've been saying that we cannot let China be away, but we should embrace China and let them know that what they've been doing was wrong. Right? What they've been doing so far was wrong. So therefore, we need to embrace them. Right? And so in order to do that, I think the middle way policy which we've been adopting is a genius idea which these organizations came forward, which is not just talking about the interests of Tibetan people, but interests of China and the world. So we cannot let China be distant. So whatever the Quad, America, India, whatever, and India has been, because now we have border issues, right? Though historically, right, India and Tibet was a neighbor, but only after China invaded Tibet, India and China became an immediate neighbor. And since then there is a problem. Since then, we always see a problem. No matter how much India is trying to embrace, but China is not willing, right, to accept the friendship, right? Even now, I just read one column. Even now, right, when Modi ji, right, sworn for the third time, why not Xi Jinping, right, congratulate him? Why made Xi Jinping kept away from congratulating Prime Minister Modi? So therefore, one significant issue which we need to understand is how China behaves. What is the psychology of Chinese leaders? But we cannot just simply look at the tips of iceberg, but we need to go beneath and to understand the basic mindset of the Chinese leaders. And to be very frank, right, I used to tell many people around me, whenever we talk, I said that China has been suspicious all the time. Now world knows, and world begins suspicious of China, right? So why China remains suspicious all the time? Because they mastered one book, that is Sun Tzu's Art of War. All through the generation, they've been reading this Sun Tzu's Art of War. And the art of war is not about trust. Art of war is not about friendship. Art of war is not about embracing others, but art of war is belligerent. Art of war is suspicious. Art of war is vengeance. Art of war is opposite to peace. So when they master art of war, how will they be able to embrace friendship? So therefore, what now is the moment for China when they aspire to be the world leader, right? China cannot keep on going on what they have been doing. So what they need to do is throw away that out of war book and retain one book, right? Because Chinese people, they are good in arts, right? In calligraphy, arts and all, they are good in arts. So I would suggest one book, that is Art of Happiness by His Holiness Dalai Lama. If China remains happy, the world remains happy, right? Everybody remains happy. If China remains suspicious, world will always be suspicious. So therefore, I think that whatever the Quad, right, it is not about challenging China, but educating China, embracing China to be a better citizen of the world.
Absolutely. And it's a beautiful answer that you gave, that China needs to be a better citizen of the world. And, and when you say that China, we have to understand the psychology of Chinese leaders, their perspective over the issues, their perspective over the humanities. And India has been always very proactive with the Tibet movement. And you also spoke about the intersecting borders. So how does Tibet issue intersect with India's border disputes with China in the Himalayas? China occupies the Axian Chin and Saksham Valley, the former princely state of Jammu Kashmir, which India claims as its own, also hosts the Tibetan government in exile. What strategic considerations shape India's approach to Tibet? And how does it balance its approach for Tibet autonomy with the need to border stability?
See, what I felt is that when we need to look at history, and no country knows better than India on Tibet, because we got Buddhism from India. We have introduced our own alphabets on the basis of Indian Devanagari scripts, right? And all through the time, we have a Himalaya, right, as our border. And it was not a barrier, but we have all of exchange, right? We have historical connections, we have cultural connections, we have trade connections, we have physical connections. So all these connections we do not have with America or Europe or Australia or Japan, but with India. So these border issues, right? Before China occupied Tibet, how many Indian policemen with the lathi will be sitting over there? Well, around 80s. But now, thousands and thousands of military personnel are stationed on both sides of the borders. So therefore, it's a very tricky thing, because India, as he always used to say, that India on Tibet issue remain overcautious, right? Now India is a rising power. Now the cautious over is gone. It still remains cautious, right? The caution is still there, because India felt that, yes, India's interest is the most important thing, right? But Tibet's interest is also India's interest, right? They cannot shy away from taking the Tibet's interest, because it is connected to India's interest. So therefore, I believe that now more and more Indians understand China, more and more Indians are understanding Tibet issues, and they are more vocal about the Tibetan issues. So therefore, I think that it is very important for Indians to be more enlightened, right? To more knowledgeable about Tibet issues, right? So because we do believe that, yes, India is our guru. We are Chela, right? We have this 1,000 years relationship. But how many Indian scholars are there on Tibetan studies? Out of 1 billion people, how many are there? So if India do not know Tibet, then how will they be able to talk about Tibet? So therefore, it is a high time for India to also understand that Tibet issue is also India's issue.
I'll just take your line, sir, where you said that India is the guru and Tibet is the chela. And Indians needs to be they have been conscious about Tibet's issue, because it's not just Tibet's issue, but India consider its issue as well. So, a lot of times, China has said that Tibet issue is a bargaining chip in broader India-China relationship. China has repeatedly accused India of using the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan issue to undermine Chinese interest. How much leverage does India actually have in Tibet and is willing to risk the confrontation with China to support Tibetan autonomy?
See, the two great nations, but two big nations, two most populous nations facing each other. Right? Just like a neighbor. Do we want a neighbor who always fight? Or do we want a neighbor who always have a peace, love, friendship, where your kids goes every time to your neighbor's house, right, and enjoy? But do we want that? Or do we always fight among the neighbors? So nobody wants a neighbor who fights all the time, right? So confrontation is not an all issue, right? What we need is to embrace. So that is a difficult part now, right? See, advancing military apparatus or mechanisms, hard power, these things, yes, it's tangible. You can, every year, you increase the budget, and China do that, India do that. So it's a reputations, right? It's a circle where there's no ends. So therefore, but at the end, what do we achieve? We achieve more hatred, right? We accumulate more distrust, right? So what do we need? A neighbor? We always feel kind of uncomfortable. No. So I think India being a guru, not just for Tibet, but for China also. So India, see, Buddhism went from India to China as well. Buddhism went to Tibet, Buddhism went all over the places. So India being not just a guru of Tibet, but guru of India, a guru of China, should be in a position to tell China that what they have done is wrong, morally wrong. Morally wrong. The guru has the legitimate role to play, right? Not just by picking up the guns, right? Moral responsibility India has. So therefore, if India did that, therefore India's value, the ancient Indian value, speaks a lot.
So as you said that.
Right. Right now, over the years, India is embracing the Western ideas, Western knowledge, Western philosophy, all Western, by living your own culture, right? Not visible, right? Like Buddhism, for example, right? Buddhism was founded in India, rooted in India, but now it is there with the Tibetan, right? Hold these canons with 1,100 teachings of Lord Buddha, 100 volumes of direct teaching of Lord Buddha, and then the 200 volumes of the commentaries of Indian masters, all being translated into Tibetan through centuries, preserved by the Tibetans. And they are not a Tibetan literature, they are Indian literature. They are ancient Indian wisdom. So I think this wisdom will be not just Buddhism, Hindus, right? Jain, Sikh, all the traditions, faiths, they coexist for thousands of years. So India can take the moral leadership to tell China that what they've been doing is wrong.
So you're very beautifully portrayed about the rich traditions, the ancient moral values of India. And you said that India is guru not just to Tibet, but also to China. And it should take the moral leadership and tell China what morally it has done wrong. But the world eye on China remains suspicious as always. But I would like to understand from you, how has China's control and repression of Tibet evolved since 2008 Tibetan unrest? In 2008, large-scale protest against Chinese rule erupted across Tibet, leading to a crackdown by Chinese security forces. Since then, China has been very conscious with its and tightened its grip with increased surveillance, restriction on religious freedom, and the erosion of Tibetan language and culture. What are the current human conditions in Tibet, and how does it impact India's concern? Just adding a point that India should be taking a moral responsibility because it has its own rich tradition which has influenced the world.
So, when we talk about Tibet, the current situations, right? Since China's occupation of Tibet, China themselves, I would say that China themselves were not at all concerned about the Tibetan people. They were more concerned about the stabilities. They are more concerned about their own regime. So whatever policies they've been implemented so far was not for the Tibetan people, but for themselves. Right. So if the aspirations of Tibetan people are not being fulfilled, yes, the protests will always be there. Grievances will always be there. Dissenting voice will always be there. So all through the time, right, Tibetan people raised their voice, telling the Chinese leadership that what they have done so far was wrong. Not just the Tibetan people, but also the Chinese leader themselves in 1980s. Right, Hu Yaobang, the liberal-minded Chinese General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, he himself said that they haven't done the right thing. The Chinese government didn't do the right thing, right? So therefore, what China has done so far was catastrophe, was a disaster. So when I go back, see, since the occupation, we used to say that more than 1 million Tibetans died directly because of the Chinese occupation. They were famine, unlike which never happened in the Tibetan history. We had the famine after China occupied Tibet, right? And quite recently, after 2008, we have a huge uprising all over Tibet, which made China scared and felt threatened that now all the Tibetans, not just in Lhasa, one pocket, but all over the region, all over Tibet, people are rising up as one solid movement, right? And they, because of this fear that since 2008, only around few hundreds were able to come to India. Before 2008, we estimate around more than 3,000 Tibetans coming annually to India. Now, after 2008, they restrict the borders, they put more surveillance mechanisms. So only around dozens. Last year, only around dozens. Right. So therefore, the restrictions have been imposed, right, manifold. Like now they are changing their own strategies. Right. They believe that, they felt that the younger generations are the wise. So therefore, now they have started a colonial-style boarding schools, where more than around 1 million Tibetan children are being taught, right, indoctrinated with the Chinese, right. So not just the Tibetan children, but DNA samplings. Where in the world, in the free world, that the police are collecting DNA samplings? Like in the free world, the medical practitioners are collecting DNA samples, right? But in Tibet, more than 2 million people's sample has been collected by the Chinese police.
Oh my God.
Right. It is purely for surveillance measures. Right. So therefore, see, when you look at Tibet, it became more horrible. Right. Unlike before, they are being more oppressive, more suppressive. Just few days back from now, one privately run Tibetan school was closed. They used to say that there are more than around 1,000 Tibetans, right, run by a monk, Tibetan monk. Now they are closing, they just closed it, right, closed this. And last year also in Tango, there was another monastic school was closed. And so now for China, the thriving Tibetan language and culture felt like a threatened. They felt threatened. So instead of embracing those Tibetan language, Tibetan culture, which is spread all over the world, China goes in the opposite direction by curbing it, by exterminating it. So therefore, it is all against the aspirations of Tibetan people. So therefore, images, Tibetans are living in hell on this earth.
I mean, the incidents that you have shared with us, I think they're very shocking, but also it might be not shocking because that is a usual China behavior. And as you said, that China needs to be a better citizen of the world and better proclamation of humanity. I think it's very important for Chinese consciousness. But you said that instead of preserving, they are diluting the Tibetan culture. So I would like to understand from you, how do Tibetans in Tibet view the Tibetan government in exile and the independence movement today? Because the reliable information from inside Tibet is scarce, but some surveys suggest that while Tibet remains proud of their culture and identity, support for the outright independence has declined. Many may prioritize economic development and improving living standards over political autonomy. So how does it impact the CTA strategy?
See, CTA, since I would say that His Holiness, under His Holiness leadership, since then, we have been talking about this middle way policy. That approach, the middle way approach, has became a policy in 1997 when the Tibetan Parliament Exile unanimously adopted our resolutions in support of the middle way policy. Now, the middle way policy is not about secessions, not about separating Tibet from China. Middle way policy is about genuine autonomy for the Tibetan people, which China claims or misclaims that that this is the independence in disguise. This is the greater autonomy. This is half independence. Right? They just escaped with different excuses. But since 1974, His Holiness has been working on this approach where both Tibetans and Chinese can live together peacefully. Right? Now, let us make an example. Let us bring an example. Yes, India was colonized by British. British one time was called as sun never sets on Britain, right? But Britain was far away from India. Britain, the less British are stationed in India, right? A majority of in India are Indian. But in Tibet right now, right, we were invaded by our neighbor, where we lived 1,000 years as a neighbor, right? So even after we remain independent in the future, though independence is our right, but we can go for that because see, we have historically independent, we can prove that. But by the virtue of that, we can go for that. But we have to remain with China. So to remain with China, why not reconciliation? Why not friendship? So therefore, I was saying when you talk about this quad, about challenging and all these things, therefore, this is not about competition. This is not about challenging. This is about bringing a positive change. Right. Though it's difficult, though it's taking time for us. We took 65 years. How long we can go again is another question. But we've been consistently working on this middle way policy where China understands that they also are being benefited. Right. So therefore, as you rightly said, that some Tibetans in Tibet might be economically prosperous, maybe some few who are cadres, Chinese cadres, maybe, right? But majority of the Tibetans are not. They are economically marginalized. Right, Tibetans inside Tibet are economically marginalized. Though many developments are taking place, economic developments are taking place, many infrastructures are built in Tibet, but they only call the Chinese migrants, right, to build those, not by giving employment for the Tibetans. Right. So therefore, we are economically marginalized. Our cultures are being annihilated and assimilated, whereby they call Tibetan Buddhism as Chinese characteristics. No way in the Tibetan Buddhist history we believe that Tibetan Buddhism is a Chinese characteristic. Now, under Xi Jinping, the Tibetan Buddhism is being labeled as under Chinese characteristics. So therefore, there is this change. There is this Chinese ulterior motive is right. They've been going on with this motive, which I would say that which stands on lies. It's not true. So how long the lies will go on? And we Tibetans believe that, and with the hope that truth will prevail.
Absolutely. Absolutely, that how long the lies can prevail, truth ultimately prevails. So, but when you shared some of the instances of Chinese authorities dismantling the Tibetan schools in Tibet and taking over the monasteries, simultaneously we see that some of the world's greatest democracy coming forward in support of Tibet, like US, Australia. But do you think that still major part of the world has turned a blind eye on China with its treatment to Tibet people or to its own people? Do you think the world and UNHRC hasn't been very proactive in taking actions against China, while these instances are very well evident and in news?
So see, we in this world, everybody, every country, every nation, every industry, or every company, whatever it is, even an individual, we only look at our own interests. We never look at others' interests. Your interest is the priority. If it is about company, the company's interest is the priority. If it's about nation, your nation's priority is the important. That's why America has a dream, India has a dream, China has a dream. So it's all talk about your own, right? Right, America first, China dream. And so everybody talks about yourself, but nobody talks about others' interests. So therefore, we are small Tibetans, but we have a giant, a leader like His Holiness, who is an apostle of peace, non-violence, ahimsa. So His Holiness gave us this message where we shouldn't talk about your own self, but you have to talk about others. You have to consider about others' well-being, even though other is your counterpart. Even though the other is your counterpart. So let me give you one example. In 1959, His Holiness came to exile. He was very young. His Holiness was very young, somewhere around in the midst of 20s. But huge responsibility. But His Holiness has to go to China to talk about Tibet. His Holiness has to come to India also in 1956 and spoke to Pandit Nehruji about Tibet issues. And His Holiness went back. Then His Holiness was forced to escape to India. And he was only around 20s. Right. And there were lots of challenges, lots of problems, right? Political problems, humanitarian problems. And His Holiness is the only savior for Tibetans. So what did His Holiness did? In 1960, just 1 year after, His Holiness composed one prayer. His Holiness is our spiritual leader as well, our supreme leader. So His Holiness composed many prayers. But there is one prayer that every Tibetan knows. That is word of truth. Word of truth. Right? It is easily accessible in Google. Translation, English translation is there in Google. Right? So, word of truth, that prayer His Holiness composed in 1960 itself. When he was very young, when he was tormented with all these problems. And what did His Holiness talk about? Compassion. Because Chinese are ignorant of what they are doing. Right? So what should we do? Compassion. Right? Embrace that. Right? And give our positive vibes, energies to them, so that their ignorance will disappear. It is really hard. In 1960, His Holiness prayed and composed a prayer. Still, China is ignorant. They are not ready to accept it. They felt that they are right each and every time. But no, they are not. Still, they are ignorant. So what should we do? Not just His Holiness, but all the world leaders should be the teacher to teach China to get away from this ignorance. So therefore, I think His Holiness, therefore all the world, the leaders, people, believe in Him, respects Him, because His Holiness consistently, since then, even now, His Holiness talks about humanity. His Holiness talks about compassion, forgiveness, selfless, all these are the values, universal values. So therefore, for China, they may look tough, but they are ignorant. And the ignorance has to go away with a sort of wisdom. The wisdom has to go. So everybody has to join hands to fill the wisdoms to the Chinese leaders and the people.
Well, taking the point that although the world might be ignorant with the concept of their nation first, but they need to come together and teach a lesson to China, and they can't be ignorant for so long, because it's not just about one single piece of land. It's about a general humanity that has to sustain in a long run. And when we talk about concepts like Vishwabandhu, such collaboration with the entire world community is very, very needed. And with this, Nitesh Niranjan asked the question that what role can international community play in advocating for Tibetan rights and autonomy? I think the question is answered.
Yes.
With this.
Yes.
Just an important announcement that we'll take the question and answers at the end. So all the participants who have joined us live, they can post their questions and we'll take it at the end of the session. So moving to the next question, and when you said that His Holiness Dalai Lama continues to inspire humanity and continues to teach lessons to humanity, what does Dalai Lama continue in both spiritually and politically for Tibetans in Tibet and the diaspora? The 14th Dalai Lama, who is now 88 years old, remains a revered figure and a spiritual leader of Tibuism. He has lived in India.
His Holiness for Tibetan is not just Dalai Lama. He is a manifestation of Lord Avalokiteshvara, embodiment of compassion. So that, not just that, but all through the evolution of Tibetan people, is being there as a protector, as a symbol of Tibet and the Tibetan people. So therefore, His Holiness, no matter how much China tried to belittle His Holiness, they have done so far many times, but in the hearts and minds of Tibetan people, they will always be there, as a savior, as a patron of Tibetan. So whether His Holiness take it as a political leadership or not, His Holiness throughout has taken a political leadership, not just as spiritual leaders. But 2011, His Holiness voluntarily devolved political leadership and gave that political leadership to the elected political leader. His Holiness right now is a spiritual leader for all the world, people of the world, not just Tibet. One time, there were books saying that Dalai Lama of Tibet. Right. And we Tibetans also believe that, yes, Dalai Lama is only for us. But Dalai Lama is not just for the Tibetan, but for the entire humanity.
Absolutely.
Right. So for all. So therefore, when you look at His Holiness commitments, lifelong commitments, but His Holiness has 3 before, and then he added 1. So when you look at the 3 commitments, plus now 4 commitments, lifelong commitments, the number 1 is a universal responsibilities, values, compassion, love, trust, all these things are there. His Holiness has been talking. His Holiness has been working on that, right? All through his life. It's a lifelong commitments, right? And Tibet, when you talk about universal, Tibet is part of it. China is part of it. Everybody is part of it. We cannot isolate any other countries. Second thing, as His Holiness being a spiritual master and a spiritual leader, His Holiness has a responsibility to connect with different faiths. As His Holiness always says that many of the conflicts and the problems happens because of the misunderstanding of the faiths. Many problems in the world happens because of misunderstanding of faiths. So it is the duty of the leaders, spiritual leaders, to create awareness about these faiths, right? To make everybody, right, embrace each other. Yes, they are, right? There are difference of opinions, values, but all for the sake of humanity, right? And the third one, as His Holiness says, that as he being a Tibetan, and as he being a spiritual master, the Tibetan knowledge system, Tibetan culture, Tibetan ecology is very important, not just for the Tibetans, but for the entire humanity. So we need to work on the Tibetan culture and the ecology. And the fourth one, which His Holiness added, as visual now, see, India as being a guru should embrace ancient Indian knowledge system. Right. So that is the His Holiness convictions. His Holiness is talking about, as you all know, His Holiness always says, I am son of India. My mind's filled with Indian wisdoms and knowledge. My stomach filled with Indian rice and dal. Both physic and minds, right, are Indians. So therefore, so for the young Indians, it is very important if India has to be a Vishwa Guru, right? India need to embrace its own values. So this is the most important thing. So for His Holiness, yes, throughout our life, not just this life, but next life, next to next life, all through our life, but we pray to be under His Holiness. But China do not know that. Chinese leaders believe that and feels that His Holiness is just like any other leaders. Look at Hu Jintao. One time he was the leader, supremo. And during the 20th National Congress, he was kicked out. But it was an embarrassing moment for Hu Jintao. One time he was the man. But only after a few years, he was disgracefully kicked out from the embassy. Right. And these are the regular, normal leaders, conventional leaders. Right. So China always looked at His Holiness like, okay, one time he'll go, His Holiness go, then he'll disappear. No. Nowhere. Right. Through all the histories, right, we've been, His Holiness is connected to Tibet. And China cannot, right, take that away from the Tibetan people. So when I told you about those Tibetans coming from Tibet, the first thing what they do when they reach India is to get a blessing from His Holiness. First thing. So therefore, see, Chinese leaders have to also understand that His Holiness is not just His Holiness in this form, but it is larger than it.
So just reinforcing what you said, that His Holiness Dalai Lama, he remains as an icon of humanity, as a spiritual guru, not just to Tibet, but to the entire world, and the world recognizes that. And you've been constantly saying that India will be playing a bigger role in building the compassion across the humanity across worldwide. And it's important for the young Indians to embrace their culture, their ancient traditions. A lot of young Indians have joined us today. So I think it's a very big message for them that instead of being influenced by Western culture advancement that we have these days, you need to embrace, because India can be Vishwaguru when each and every citizen of India understands his or her value and what has been the legacy of its past. So it's very important for the young youth to understand the value system that comes from an ancient India. So moving to the next question, and I think it can be a little sensitive or it might be a little early to ask, but there has been whispers in the corridors of geopolitics. So I'll ask you, a little sensitive, that what is Dalai Lama's view on future of Tibet, and how is he preparing for the delicate issue of succession? Because he hasn't announced any successor yet. It might be a very delicate question, but these are the whispers in the corridors of geopolitics. So I thought you can answer.
So the future of Tibet, His Holiness has thought of it since from a long time. But His Holiness has been thinking about the future of Tibet. In 1987, let's talk about 1970s, when he talked about how to resolve this conflict, Sino-Tibetan conflict, to a middle way. It's not just about present, it's about future of Tibet. How can we have a better future for the Tibetan people to live, survive, thrive with their own culture, identity, language, Buddhism, ecology. Then in 1987, His Holiness proposed 5-point peace plan for Tibet, that is also for future Tibet. Then in 1988, in Strasbourg, in the European Parliament, His Holiness talks about the Strasbourg proposal, that is also for future Tibet. In 1992, His Holiness wrote guidelines for future Tibet polity, that also talks about future Tibet. So all these, when you look at 5-point peace plan, Strasbourg proposals, guidelines for future Tibet, what is the trust? Trust is make Tibet a zone of peace. Make Tibet a zone of peace. Make Tibet a demilitarized place where everybody lives peacefully. It could be in the future, right? So it has to be also. When we have two great giants, two great civilizations, right, India and China, how can we afford to have a conflict which will be disastrous? Why can't we live in peace? So therefore, His Holiness always go in the front talking about this peace, right, making Tibet a peaceful zone. So all through that time, His Holiness has been talking about the future of Tibet. But if the future of Tibet is sustained, the world will be sustained in a better way. Now, not just about future. Now, let me tell you one thing. See, India and China both embraced, both talks about great civilizations. Great civilization. India has a great civilizations. China has a great civilizations, right? So what role Tibet played in the history, in those civilizations? What role Tibet played? Right. See, since, as I said before, Tibet cannot be looked as a standalone issue. We are all interconnected. So now going back to the past, what role Tibet played with the two great civilizations? Right? Two great nations, two great civilizations, which they being eulogizing, right, all through the time. So I would say that Tibet played as a lifeline. Why? Without the Tibetan river, the great Indus Valley civilization will not be happening. Will not be. Because of the Indus Valley, Indus River, which originates from Tibet. Even China, Yellow River, the ancient Chinese civilizations, right, flourished at the banks of Yellow Rivers. And Yellow River originates from Tibet. So Tibet was very much part of the civilizations since then. And even in the future, I would say that yes, Tibet remained as a buffer between those two, because therefore they will not be, they never became an immediate neighbor. Only after China occupied Tibet, they became immediate neighbor. Right? Tibet remained as a buffer for so long. Can we afford to be a buffer all the time, or should we be the bridge between India and China? But we have a Buddhism. We are a faithful child of India. But and China is also a child of India. So they have the Buddhism. So now China tried to change the Tibetan Buddhism and make it as Chinese characteristics. But what do? They look for the Tibetan teachers, Tibetan masters. Right? And the Tibetan masters are filled with Indian knowledge systems. So therefore, in the future, when we talk about Tibet, yes, we could be the bridge between these two great civilizations. We did in the past as a lifeline, and we will be in the future. Right? So for that is one thing on Tibet. Now for His Holiness reincarnation. See, everybody is talking about this. What could be in the future? Taking the different scenarios that China will also be implanting their own candidates. But even if they did, who will recognize it? Who will recognize it? The Edis communist regime, right, putting one boy and named it as His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. No, nobody will recognize. Right. So who has the legitimate authority? Only His Holiness Dalai Lama, because we talk about the reincarnation of the present Dalai Lama. For China, all the time they've been belittling His Holiness, they've been demonizing His Holiness. How will they have the authority to choose the next one? Right. Therefore, His Holiness jokingly used to say that. His Holiness jokingly used to say that. His Holiness sometimes is very humorous, right? So His Holiness says that before they reincarnate Dalai Lama, they should go for their own great huntsman, Mao Zedong's reincarnation, Deng Xiaoping's reincarnation, their own leaders. Then, at the end, Dalai Lama, without going on their own leaders, Deng Xiaoping and Mao Zedong, the great huntsmen, the founder of the nation or the Communist Party, they could have done it, right? They should have done it. Why they were so obsessed with the Dalai Lama's reincarnation when they are demonizing the present one? So there is no logic at all for China, and they do not have any legitimate authority. Only His Holiness has the authority. And for the Tibetans, this is not the first Dalai Lama. This is the 14th Dalai Lama. And we have gone through it over the histories. Since from the 14th century till date, we have been with the Dalai Lama. Right. So I don't think that that will be a problem. So we have a full faith and trust. And His Holiness also says many times that if the Tibetan people wishes to have the institution remain, they will remain. His Holiness never said that if the Chinese government wishes to have no, His Holiness never said that. His Holiness says that because His Holiness is the patron of Tibet. Right. So His Holiness says that if the Tibetan people wishes, and we Tibetan people wishes to have His Holiness again, and His Holiness will go according to that. And the power and the authority, the ultimate power and authority lies with His Holiness alone. Nobody else. Nobody else. So, on these incarnation issues, His Holiness made a statement in 2011. It is also visible in the Google, right, in the open sources. So the young Indians, please read it. What His Holiness wishes for. What will be his incarnation? Right. So incarnation will be totally spiritual, based on traditions of Buddhism, Tibetan Buddhism. And China cannot do that on their own whims. They cannot.
I guess the message is very loud and clear to the world that Tibet has been a very integral part of ancient civilization and will be continuing the integral part in the coming times. And it will always be an icon for prosperous humanity. And yes, so we have a lot of questions, and sir, you have answered a lot of answers. Now we have few questions from the participants. We'll just take few questions from them. Anyone who would like to ask anything to sir regarding India, China, India, Tibet, strategic partnership, global geopolitics and Tibet. So you can post your question and I'll put it on behalf of you to the sir. So, but it was a great introduction. And once again, I'll just say to the world that the message is very loud and clear that Tibet has been an integral part and will continue to be an integral part of the world.
Yes, definitely. Tibet is. And even China is. Even India is. Even the United States. Everybody is a part of this universe. So why not build a better place? Not with conflicts, not with this vengeance and suspicion, mistrust, but we cannot afford to. So let's build a better place to live, better world to live. So for that, I think the ball is on the Chinese court. Chinese leader, even when they aspire to be the world leader, they should have a moral ground to go for that. And they don't have it. But we look at China. They occupied Tibet. They occupied the East Turkestan. They occupied certain part of Mongolia. They make it as Inner Mongolia. So, right. And look at Hong Kong. Look at Taiwan issues. Right. And they were all in a difficult positions, in conflicting positions. Right. So when home is in mess. When their home is in mess, how will they be the leader?
That's true.
So therefore, they need to clean up. They need to be more human. They need to be more benevolent, right? Rather than belligerent.
But I think it's when you say that home is a mess, they need to clean it up. But they don't believe it's a mess because they have created a boundary around them. They are the world leaders already.
See, they live in their own world, but because so far they've been isolationist. So far they've been thinking that they are the middle kingdom. But no, everybody is connected. But after COVID, look at China. Now China's economy, right? They were supposed to have a third plenum last year. They did it this time. With the difficulties, we see lots of news coming out. Right. So China has to. They cannot remain isolationist. But if they want to be the world leader, they need to be converged. They need to be a convergence. And convergence is not about conflict. It's about embracing each other with friendship, trust, reconciliations. Right. So without that, China cannot excel. Therefore, Chinese leaders, it's high time for the Chinese leaders to wake up from their ignorance and should be benevolent, right, to give what Tibetans have aspires for, right, to preserve Tibetan language, identity, culture, norm, right, and which the Tibetans for centuries have preserved. We're not asking something which is alien to us, right? If it is alien to us, then China has to think a lot. But we are asking for what we have been doing for the last, is from the evolutions, right? And we are the legitimate right. We have the legitimate right to do that. So China, see, the ball is on China's court, and China has to do it. But there is no other or something like that, right? China has to. Right. So it is up to the Chinese leaders.
And as you rightly said, it's important to understand the Chinese leaders' psychology, and it's high time for them also to realize that it's very important right now to clean up the mess, as you said. So it was a very intriguing question where we discussed about global geopolitics in Tibet, and we had a lot of students, Indian youth, who have joined us today, and they have posted a lot of questions, and I think that I've already asked those questions on their behalf. Now we'll have a leaderboard on which there will be one with the most engagement will be given the prizes. So I request Vishal, if you can please display the leaderboard. I would request my colleague to please. Oh, okay. We have the winners here. The first is Nitesh Niranjan. The second is Varun. And third is Kashish. Congratulations to the winners. All three will get certificates from Geo and Pratha. And the first one will get a special hamper from Pratha. So congratulations, Nitesh, Varun, and Kashish. Thank you so much. We can get back to the screen. Thank you so much, sir, for joining us in this session. It has been very, very intriguing session where you said that, and taking the major points that India is guru not just to Tibet, but to the China as well. And it's very important for Indians to embrace their culture for a global humanity. So it's very important, and the entire community should come for Tibet's problem, because it's not just a standalone problem, but a global problem. So thank you so much, sir. And very important, the Chinese needs to understand the need to clean the mess in their house.
they have to. There's no other choice.
There's no other choice, and there's no other.
And thank you so much, sir, for joining in this session and giving us so much of precious time of yours on this vital issue of Tibetan geopolitics. But before ending this session, so I would like to have a poll with all the attendees who have joined us today. It's regarding the Indian stand on the geopolitics regarding Tibet and its effect on Southeast Asia. So I hope it is getting published, and is the poll visible to everybody?
Yes, the poll is visible, and I think...
So I would request all the attendees to just give their remarks whether they think that the Indian government policy is geopolitically beneficial to Southeast Asian countries. So if they think it is, then they can remark yes. If no, then no. And thank you so much for joining the session, sir. You can continue, Divyanshi.
Yes. Thank you so much, sir, for giving us this valuable time. And as we said that we have always tried to take over the voices of the entire world and shape it into a perspective. So what do you think about this initiative of ours that we have taken up?
See, can I?
Yes, yes.
So I think the initiative is very important, right? The Pratha has been a youth organizations, right, which is affiliated with the government of India. So I think the youth of India has to understand the values. So for Tibetan, just the last one, right? I would say that poor Tibetans, but we are only around 1.6 million in all, right? And in exile, we have only around 150,000 Tibetans. It's like an ant. to an elephant or the giant dragon is like an ant, small ant. So, now for me, who is the most powerful animal in the world? I would presume that it's an ant, because ant carries more than his weight. Elephant won't do that. Whales can't. But only ants can carry the weight which is beyond his weight. Right? So small doesn't matter. What we have to do is, now India being a giant also, now India has its own strength. So for the young Indians, accumulate your strength. Focus on your strength, not on others' strength. Right? If we focus on others' strength and accumulate the strengths, then you are trying to let away your own strength. So the Indian strength right now is the wisdom, ancient Indian knowledge system. Right? So this, if you can accumulate this, if you can master, then there's no doubt that India will be a Vishwa Guru. There's no doubt. Right? So far, India has been catching up on with other strength, like China's strength, but America's strength, Soviet Union or Russian strength. Right? So India's focus, if it's on other strength, by neglecting your own strength, then it doesn't match. So the match will be that you have to accumulate your own strength, master it, then it will be your force. So therefore, for the Tibetans, but China, even though they are giants, they were not able to wipe us away. Why we survived, why we thrived for the last 65 years? Because we accumulate, we focus on our strength, that is our culture, our language, our tradition, which China do not have. Right? This is not the China's strength, this is our strength, which we work on for the last 5 years. And with the help of the Indian government and public, we were able to have so many monastic institutions, so many cultural centers, so many institutions over here which are very vibrant, right? And it thrives. Therefore, it is very important for the Indian youths to go for your strength. This is the last message which I thought I should convey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. And I think that it's a very important message that India in the contemporary times should not focus on taking strength from other countries, but focus on their strength and their value system that has been embodied to them from the ancient times. So thank you so much, sir, for joining us. And it has been a wonderful, wonderful interaction with you. And we hope that we have another interaction very soon and we meet in person. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity again. So wish to have more sessions.
Absolutely.
With more young
Our
Indians.
pleasure. Our pleasure, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Give my regards to Vishal also.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, sir. And thank you to all the students, youth who have joined us to understand the global geopolitics in Tibet and for actively taking part in the podcast. Thank you so much. And we wish you a good day ahead. Thank you.
Thank you.